Today we're gonna make some raspberry tarts together. It is a classic summer pastry, so let's jump right in. So in my previous tart video, I showed you how to make the sucre dough, so I'm not going to do that this time. We're focusing just on the elements you need for this raspberry tart for the filling and toppings. I'm starting off with an almond cream or almond frangipane. So for this, I am going to begin by creaming my butter. So obviously, you know, it's best if that butter is already at room temperature or it's going to take a lot longer to cream. Then I'm adding in my dry ingredients. I've got some almond flour, I've got some flour, I've got some powdered sugar, and then all of this is going to mix into the butter. At this point, things might be looking a little bit on the dry side, but keep mixing. I promise it is going to end up with the correct texture in the end. So it's going to start clumping up as that butter and all of those dry ingredients incorporate. Then it's on to some liquid ingredients. I'm adding in some eggs and then a little bit of almond extract. That is optional. You do not need to add it, but I love that flavor, so I'm adding it in, and then back into mixing we go, just to make sure everything is completely incorporated, that egg is completely emulsified into the rest of the batter. After all of our ingredients are completely combined, I'm transferring this dough into a container. I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap and get it into my refrigerator for a minimum of 30 minutes. This needs to rest a little bit, needs to cool down, and then we will use it in our tart shells later. This is something you can make a couple days in advance, so if you're planning out your bake, that is not a problem. One other thing that really needs to cool down is the glaze. I'm going to brush onto the raspberries later. This is super simple. I just have water, sugar, some pectin, and then some lemon juice, or you could use citric acid. I am just heating up the water. I've combined the pectin and the sugar so the pectin doesn't clump up at all. Then once the water is just starting to come to a simmer, I'm going to whisk in the sugar and pectin together, and then I'm just going to let this boil for about 10 minutes. Now, do you need to make this recipe, this sort of shiny glaze that I'm going to put on the top? No, you absolutely do not have to. However, I think it both looks very nice and I think that it does help protect the fruit. Since we have so many raspberries that are about to be piled onto the top, when you have a really fresh, lovely raspberry, and if it's perfect looking, you know, you can get away with not doing it. But if your raspberries are even just like fine or good, they can have a little bit of a dullness to them that is okay, but it's not amazing. So this glaze is going to come in and just elevate the appearance to the next level, no matter how perfect your raspberries are looking. If you do not want to make this, other options include buying some sort of neutral glaze. It's a little bit hard to buy in a small quantity, but if you're planning to make a lot of tarts, you can buy larger quantities from pastry sites or online or in pastry stores. Or you can also use something like an apricot jam and then warm it up a little bit, strain it to get rid of any chunks, and then that is something you can use because the color is so neutral and the flavor is quite neutral as well, and it will give you that added shine. So here I am boiling that mixture, and then after this has some of the water has evaporated, the sugar and pectin are completely dissolved, I'm taking it off the heat, adding in the lemon juice, and then this too will get plastic wrap and then go into my refrigerator so it can completely cool down. The last element that needs to be made in advance of making these raspberry tarts is a vanilla pastry cream. So just like any pastry cream, I've got some milk and cream in my saucepan. I'm adding in sugar. I'm using vanilla paste. You, of course, could use vanilla bean or vanilla extract, depending on what you have available to you. And then I also have some egg yolk and cornstarch. I am going to warm up that cream and milk mixture, make sure that the sugar is dissolved, and once that is both hot and the sugar is dissolved, I'm going to temper it into the egg yolks and then put everything back into my saucepan. If you have never made a pastry cream before, it really is not that hard, but there are definitely some things that can go wrong, namely this part on the stove here. It is possible to overcook or overheat this mixture, and because we have egg yolks in here, that really can lead to things going awry. So I recommend letting your focus be on this pastry cream. Once you get to this step, stand there, make sure to whisk pretty continuously, and then also the temperature is quite important. Even if it feels like this is taking a long time, this is a small batch, so it's not going to be too long. But if you are making a lot more, or if you're in a kitchen, if you're doing pastry production and you have, 2 kilos of cream or something like that amount of pastry cream, it can take a long time. However, if you heat the pastry cream on the stove too quickly, if you have too high of a heat, that egg yolk can curdle, it can turn the pastry cream really weird, it can end up being a little bit grainy even. So keep it low and slow. Even if it feels like you are just wasting time standing in front of your stove, the end result will be infinitely better if you just allow this to take its own sweet time. So as you can see here, this pastry cream is starting to thicken. I want to make sure that it is completely thick and it is exactly the texture I want. And because this is a really low heat, I'm allowing it to have a little bit extra time here on the stove after I've seen it start to thicken. And then once I'm quite satisfied with the thickness, I see some bubbles popping up from the bottom, I am going to remove this from the heat, and then we're going to finish this up by adding in the butter. Some people like to add in the butter right away while this is still hot on the stove. I like to give it a minute or two before I whisk this in, and as soon as I get the butter into my pastry cream, I transfer it to another container and then switch from my whisk to my immersion blender. This is one of those tools that is so vital to any pastry kitchen, and while yes, technically you can make a pastry cream without an immersion blender, the texture is going to be different. It is going to be way smoother and creamier and much more luscious if you get in there with an immersion blender and make sure everything is emulsified completely. Now, after everything has had a chance to completely cool down, I'm going to start actually making my tart shells. So first I'm getting in there with that almond frangipane or almond cream. I'm going to use a piping bag to make this a little bit easier on myself, but you could simply scoop it into the tart shells if you want to. That's completely okay. Because I want to have a layer of pastry cream on top of this, I'm putting in a pretty thin layer of the almond cream, which is why I really wanted to use a piping bag to make sure that that layer was pretty even. Now, because I want this to be a super intensely raspberry tart, I am going to squish a couple fresh, or you could use frozen, raspberries into the bottom of the tart shell with the almond cream, and then these will be baked in the oven together. So these tart shells I have obviously pre-baked, but they are not like completely golden brown yet. That is because they are going to be baked again with the almond cream in there. You optionally could also egg wash the tarts if you like that super golden brown look or that little bit of a shine to them. It's also absolutely okay. I chose not to, both because I was just making these for myself and it just was not a super important thing to me. So after all of my tart shells have the almond cream, have the raspberries, I'm just putting them into my oven to bake, and I'm just baking this until the almond cream is nice and light brown. Make sure to let those tart shells cool completely before you start filling them with all of the other fillings and toppings. You do not want things to get really slippy and slidey because things are too warm in there. So first, I'm going to go in with a nice thin layer of that vanilla pastry cream. Again, I'm using a piping bag to make sure I have a really nice thin, smooth layer, but you could just plop it in and use an offset spatula if you rather. And then I did have some raspberry jam. You can make your own or use store-bought just for one more element of raspberry. Now I'm going to pile my raspberries on top, and because I like a little bit of chaos but not too much chaos, I went around the edges first and created kind of a ring of raspberries going in kind of every which way, but in an orderly fashion. And then I'm just going to mound a couple more raspberries into the center to create a small little raspberry mountain. I'm going to repeat this process with the rest of my tart shells before getting in there with that glaze that we made and had in the refrigerator. I warmed that up a little bit. You want to make sure it's at least at like 30 to 35 degrees Celsius so that it is fluid and runny. It'll be a lot easier to paint on with a paintbrush, or if you have like a spray gun, you can use that as well. Okay, as you can see here, the raspberry tarts are looking lovely, but especially if I'm going to be serving these later in the evening, the next day, having some sort of glaze on there is just going to help keep everything looking amazing for a much longer time. And if some of the raspberries are like fine, it's just gonna be wonderful. So I am just using a pastry brush to paint on that warmed up glaze. Again, you can use any kind of neutral glaze or apricot jam or whatever you have on hand, and I'm just trying to evenly coat everything going around the outside, again just for appearance and protection of everything. I really hope you give this tart a try. Again, it is such a classic summer tart flavor, actually just like all year round. If you go to France, if you go to a patisserie, you're going to find some kind of raspberry tart in the pastry case, I'm sure, in the summer. It is just so delicious, even though it's such a classic flavor and you really just have raspberry and vanilla going on in here. You have so many different textures. You have the crunch from the tart shell, you have the soft almond cream in there, you have the creamy pastry cream, and of course all of those fresh raspberries. If you give it a try, don't forget to tag me on Instagram at Maddie Brame. I love seeing all of your creations. Make sure you're subscribed down below too, because I have one more tart recipe coming your way later this summer that I cannot wait to share with you, and I don't want you to miss out. All right, thanks for watching. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.